Okay, this is episode 216 of Uncensored Conservatism. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're just going to take a look at diversity today. And you probably heard the phrase a billion times that diversity is our strength. It has become a moral imperative. You must accept it as an absolute truth. If it is true, however, let's just assume that all men and women were equal in every respect, which they clearly are not. Would women still be subjugated? Would there be a patriarchy? Are statistical differences between ethnicities or races necessarily bound to result in some kind of racial supremacy? Another word for diversity is difference. If there are differences, then there are likely inequalities. But according to the progressive left, inequality is our greatest injustice. Now, it sounds like a blatant contradiction because they believe that differences or diversity necessarily lead to discrimination, but they really don't think that diversity is a strength. In fact, it should be an evil because, there's inequalities. So it's just take the most basic example, human biodiversity or racial differences, and you'll be branded a racist before you can even get the sentence out of your mouth. Most things in the world, or societies in the world, are actually based on homogeneity, like values and language and culture. Change and diversity destroys all these things. And today, diversity has joined mom, the flag, and apple pie as a symbol of America. But even a cursory examination of diversity reveals it is a great source of division and conflict in this country. The words divide, divisive, and devious all share their root with diversity, the opposite of unity or united. In fact, strength comes from unity, not from diversity. Diversity breeds conflict and suspicion. Unity breeds discussion and peace. Harvard professor Robert Putnam wrote a book several years ago called Bowling Alone, and its main conclusion: racial and ethnic diversity destroys trust in neighbors and institutions. Whether we're talking about a place like North Dakota or a very diverse place like San Francisco, he found that the greater level of diversity, the less people trusted one another. And he hid his findings for about 5 years. Studies have proven that unconscious processes reflect a suspicion of those most unlike us that carry over to the societal level. Young children learn very early what race they are and they prefer faces of their own race. And it's been known for years that whites living in isolation from blacks have a higher opinion of blacks than whites who live in more diverse areas. In 1984 and 1988, Jesse Jackson, in his presidential runs, received his highest share of the white vote from areas with less black people. And all of this is natural as a species. We would naturally gravitate toward those most like us. You obviously care more about your immediate family than you do about your neighbor, for example. Societies thrive when there is a cultural consensus on behavior, values, ideals, and faith. And all these things may be arbitrary, but they're no less important. And this can be found in the Putnam study, where he found that in the more diverse areas, there was a lower level of confidence in the local government. They may protest and march in the streets, but they have low voter registration numbers. They have fewer friends. They're less likely to volunteer or give to charity. They watch more television and just generally lead a less happy life. Now, we can see these cultural differences in action Asian culture values education and academic success very highly and has served the Asian community very well. Conversely, Black urban culture does not value education or academic success as highly as Asians or even Jews. And that's my cat. In Tim Walz's Minneapolis, only 25% of Black students graduate high school. We can see how this cultural difference in an approach to education has helped Asians but has hurt Blacks. And there are, for whatever reason, very real cultural differences between groups of people. Blacks and Hispanics have higher rates of crime, higher rates of illegitimacy, higher poverty rates, and even higher death rates from most diseases than whites. This is borne out in cold hard statistics of interracial crime. There is more black on white crime than white on black crime, or even black on black crime. For every black person mugged by a white thug, 24 whites are mugged by a black thug. So obviously, racial change creates cultural or societal change. A black community is certainly different from a Hispanic community, which is different from a white community, which is certainly different from an Asian community. And it's perfectly natural to, in effect, self-segregate or sort with one of your own. Now, if diversity being a strength was an inherent truth, we would practice it spontaneously. There would be no cheerleading, there would be no sloganeering, and there would be no authoritarian enforcement. This is Professor Tatu Van Hanen of Finland, a sociologist and economist who has studied diversity from a human biological and evolutionary standpoint. He did landmark research on racial and ethnic diversity and conflict across many societies and found the greater the diversity, the higher the probability and the intensity of conflict within that society. Again, it makes sense from an evolutionary, perhaps, genetic standpoint that we would be most trusting of those most like us, whoever us is. At one time, although not racial per se, unless we're talking about the founders of Planned Parenthood, the answer to equalization was eugenics. By sterilizing criminals and the insane or the low IQ, inequality could be reduced. At the forefront of this movement was the Democratic Socialists of Sweden, and the practice didn't end there until 1979. Instead, progressives have removed biology from the discourse, and references to differences among races on a variety of metrics is now forbidden. To believe there are inherent differences is considered racist. Now, recently, some civil rights leaders are asserting that segregation is slowly creeping back into American life. This is interesting since the number of whites in America is actually declining. In 1970, almost 85% of public school children were white, but that declined to less than 50% in the 5 decades since. And studies also show that when the population of an area reaches 10 to 20% minority or is becoming diverse, the white population leaves and is called white flight. Just looking at blacks, let's take a look if no slaves were ever imported into the United States and blacks from Africa had no way to reach our shores. What would American history look like? Well, there would be no slavery to start, so that's a good thing. There would have been no bloody civil war and thousands of deaths, and that's a good thing. Jim Crow laws? No need for it. And there would be no paramilitary wing of the Democratic Party, the KKK. There would be no race riots, there would be no affirmative action, and there would be no forced integration through busing. And guess what? We would still be an industrial, military, and economic powerhouse. The traffic light still would have been invented and the wonders of the peanut explored. Of course, we cannot change history, and I'm certainly not calling for an all-white Protestant country, but just noting what would have happened if no blacks ever set foot on American shores shows what I'm talking about. It is obvious that America's native population is declining as evidenced by low birth rates, so how do you increase the population? through immigration. And today, the bulk of that immigration is coming from third world countries with low skilled workers and one can argue, on average, lower IQs. Question how bright these immigrants are, and you will be branded a racist or a xenophobe. But differences in intelligence across racial or ethnic groups are, for whatever reason, a reality. Smarter people are simply better at organizing information that understand the long-term benefits of cooperation, not confrontation. The problem is not so much immigration as it is an aversion to assimilation. We are not Americans today as much as we are a mishmash of hyphenated Americans. Now, we were once considered the great melting pot, but today that phrase is considered triggering in some academic corners. When you hear the phrase, all are welcome here, is it really true? The white male is seen as the ultimate member of the oppressor class, a member of the patriarchy, and as such, is certainly unwelcome. Are Christians really welcome here? A Christmas show at school is now a holiday show. Kids don't have an Easter break, they have a spring break. But they sure as hell can get a Muslim holiday off, and it's listed as a reason, or in some schools given rooms to pray to Mecca like good little Muslims. Can a Christian kid openly pray in a public school? It seems we are more welcoming of some and not so much of others. We're told we're a country of immigrants, and indeed we are, and if we look at the one great wave of immigration in the early 20th century, we see a huge difference of why immigration worked then, but is transforming America today. Those immigrants who came here then were primarily European who spoke a variety of languages, but had one thing in common, their Christianity. Now, obviously, the Catholic from Italy practices a different type of Catholicism than that from Ireland, and even both of them a different type of Christianity than the Protestant from Germany. But it was the commonality of Christianity that makes it different. They surrendered their diversity to become integrated into American society. They may have been proud of their Polish, Irish, or Italian heritage, and maybe even spoke their native languages at home, but they assimilated into the American fabric. So let's look at the lack of that phenomena today in Europe, specifically Germany, a country rich in tradition and culture with a unique language. As Germany opened their borders to mainly Middle Eastern Muslims, what has happened? Some schools have become homogenous, with Muslim students and no Germans. Incidents of anti-Semitism have increased, as has crime, in the name of diversity. Women have been raped, and incidents of terrorism have occurred. And the academic achievement of German students is showing a decline because of the influx of non-Germans. Now, language is one thing that defines a culture or nationality, and it's also a unifier in that society. But how many school districts in this country now employ English as a second language teachers? California posts signs in multiple languages by law. Previous generations of immigrants spoke Polish, Slovak, German, Italian, Russian, and they all learned the English language without the benefit of an ESL teacher. Instead, today we celebrate the differences through made-up feel-good phrases like multiculturalism and all are welcome here. And let's look at higher education today. When the Supreme Court decided the Fisher case out of Texas that suggested that racial preferences in admission may be contrary to civil rights law, a who's who of educational scholars penned a letter to the New York Times titled, "Diversity in Higher Education Remains an Essential National Priority." And we can go back to the Bakke decision in 1978. Diversity in higher education was considered possibly a plus in admissions, and then only as an aside. Colleges took that aside comment and ran with it. And today's average college campus is certainly more diverse racially and ethnically. But the entire skin color as diversity line of thought is actually racist. The ability to think critically and succeed in college is not linked to the level of melanin in one's skin. Instead, I believe we have seen that diversity for the sake of diversity has had huge costs and little, if any, upside. Some of the results are self-segregation, where even places like Harvard now offer separate graduation ceremonies for BIPOC people, remedial education at the college level, the elimination of standardized testing for admissions because it might screen out some preferred race or ethnicity, an explosion of on-campus ethnic groups that exclude outsiders, stupid majors that prepare the graduate to be a cashier at the local Gap, and of course, bureaucratic bloat. Most importantly, it subverts meritocracy. There's another interesting deleterious tidbit of evidence that diversity may not be a good thing. On the left is Professor Umit Gurun of the University of Dallas and Professor David H. Solomon of Boston College. Together they examined fertility rates and diversity. They found that as diversity has increased in the country, fertility rates have decreased. Now, obviously, decreased fertility rates have a great effect on a society. If you drop to zero, you go extinct eventually. So why is this? Well, remember that all races prefer to be with or identify with their own. It's not a white person thing, and it's not a black person thing or a Hispanic person thing, and it may very well be genetically determined over years of evolution. Think about this. Suppose you're white and you meet your future mate at a bar where there are all white people. And you get together, and you're obviously going to have white offspring. But the more diverse that social context, the odds obviously drop unless you hook up with a non-white, which may explain why there are more biracial offspring today. The researchers call this homophily, an inbred preference to breed with a member of your own race. Again, this is not racist. It is a human tendency across all cultures and societies. And marriage and procreation within that marriage or relationship is certainly predicated upon trust. Now, hearkening back to the Putnam book, Bowling Alone, we learned that as a community is more diverse, the lower the level of trust in that community. Putnam's findings also revealed a greater degree of social isolation in the more diverse communities. You cannot find a mate if you're home alone watching television. We can also look at instances where diversity is actually not a good thing and look no further than the fire department of the city of North Miami Beach, with a heavy concentration of Haitians. At one time, being a beach community, they require that all applicants be swimmers. However, Haitians are not good swimmers. So how do you increase the number of Haitians in your fire department? You eliminate the swimming requirement, which is a huge price to pay for the drowning swimmer in Miami Beach. Now, many conservatives believe that we can impose a common culture on a diverse people, that you can teach Americanism, but it's been a failure. How can you teach Western civilization, because that's what we're really talking about here, on anyone with no notion of Western civilization? How many countries have adopted a Western style of government? And it's very few, if any. Look no further than South Africa, or even Pakistan, or our neighbor to the south, Mexico, and you find that non-white cultures seldom share our ideas of how an institution should work. This thing cannot replace folkways, tradition, or language. After World War II, white Western elites decided that a multiracial democracy was the only acceptable system of government. That's because we focus on too much on equality, or more accurately, forced equality, which is now called equity. If you dare question the mantra that diversity is our strength, you're going to be chastised as a racist or xenophobe. This guy, Tucker Carlson, once asked that question and received the racist label. The Southern Poverty Law Center labels you a purveyor of hate if you dare utter the forbidden words that diversity may not be a strength after all. And I can almost guarantee you that those white liberals who espouse the line that diversity is our strength live in a lily white community. They won't admit it, but diversity is good for you, but not for them. Now, I'm not the first to use this phrase or solution, but it's called benevolent xenophobia. Let's start, as the evidence shows from professors like Putnam and others, that different groups are just happier apart. Let's end the multicultural claptrap. Some cultures are better than others, and not all societies, ethnicities, races, or people are equal. Let's embrace Western culture that has advanced mankind greater in a shorter period of time in history and celebrate its superiority. Has a Borneo bushman sent anyone to the moon? Was human flight created in the jungles of Africa? Was the computer invented in the wilds of the Amazonian rainforest? How would benevolent xenophobia work? Call it whatever, but it amounts to reparations with repatriation. And it might be actually cheaper than to demulticulturalize the country by paying newcomers, no matter how you define them, to leave than forcing integration upon people who do not want to integrate. And by the way, all those pro-multicultural, all are welcome flag-waving white liberals out there, get out of your lily white community, because that's where you live. You want proof? The most diverse states show the slowest growth of white growth, while the least diverse states show the greatest growth in the white population. So is diversity a strength? It may not. It may be in thought, but certainly not in the reality of life. And that's it. Have a great day. More pleasant tomorrow.